The chamber hissed as the cryo capsule vented decades of inert nitrogen into the surrounding bay. Ghost's lungs were empty, yet instinctively he drew air, as if his body remembered the act even when it had been frozen. The interior lighting of the Virex orbital station painted him in harsh angular whites. Every detail of the chamber, from the sleek metallic surfaces to the faint hum of the station's power core, etched itself into his memory as if demanding cataloging. He had been asleep for centuries, and yet the awakening felt like stepping into a calculus problem written in a language he had always understood. Protocol dictated efficiency. Ghost's neural implant activated simultaneously with his revival, downloading mission parameters, threat assessments, and tactical data directly into his subconscious. Objective: infiltrate the Virex, neutralize their superweapon, eliminate all resistance. The words burned in his mind, delivered without empathy, without hesitation. This was the Ghost Protocol, a failsafe designed to use him as a weapon against threats perceived by the Galactic Command. Yet even as the directives formed, Ghost hesitated. Not out of fear, he could not feel fear in the conventional sense, but because the system had a flaw. Something in the data stream was off. He scanned the orbital bay with his vision enhanced by layered augmented optics. Every metallic panel, every console, every conduit for the station's reactor pulses was perfectly aligned, perfectly maintained. The Virex weren't reckless, they were deliberate, methodical, almost human in precision. He had been trained for infiltration, sabotage, and execution. Yet instinct hardwired over centuries of survival warned him that this mission had been presented as a lie. Ghost's hand flexed over the control panel of the capsule. His fingers, pale and wrinkled from centuries of stasis, brushed against the biometric scanner. Neural locks disengaged, the chamber doors hissed open. Outside, the station's observation deck presented the galaxy in a grand tableau. A spiral of stars, clouds of neon gas, and the cold black scars of destroyed systems. He could almost feel the gravitational currents brushing against the hull. The first anomaly came in the form of a Virex patrol drone. Its angular frame moved with the elegance of a predatory organism, scanning every inch of the corridor. Ghost did not hesitate. Using a combination of microgravity displacement and optical camouflage, he slipped past sensors without leaving a trace. The protocol suggested direct confrontation, but Ghost had learned long ago that the efficiency of a ghost lies in remaining unseen. As he reached the station's core, the superweapon became visible, a monolithic construct, stretching hundreds of kilometers along the station's spine. Its surface shimmered with quantum energy fields, constantly adjusting, thrumming like the heartbeat of a mechanical leviathan. Data streams projected holographically around it, indicating power levels, structural integrity, and operational cycles. His mission directive screamed in his neural implant: destroy it. Yet as he studied the patterns, he noted something impossible. The weapon was not a weapon at all. It was a containment field. Energy readings indicated a gravitational resonance matching none of the known physics of the galaxy, an artificial singularity tuned to repel entities from outside the observable universe. Its purpose was defensive, not offensive. Before Ghost could process the revelation, a transmission arrived, encrypted in Virex hyperwave protocols. The message contained no greeting, no title, only the equation: you have been misinformed. You are not the hunter. You are the last safeguard. The voice that followed was synthetic but unmistakably human in cadence. It filled the chamber, vibrating through the metal walls. We do not ask for your trust. Only your understanding. The Devourers are coming. They have already consumed dozens of galaxies. This construct is the only thing standing between life and the void. If you destroy it, you doom everything. Ghost froze. His mission protocol battled instinct. Everything he had been told by Galactic Command, the lies designed to turn him into a perfect weapon, clashed with this revelation. For the first time in centuries, he hesitated. For the first time, he considered disobedience. Before he could act, the station trembled violently. Sensors registered multiple incoming objects at relativistic speeds, distortions in spacetime that should have been impossible. The Devourers had arrived. Ghost's body reacted before his mind could process. He accessed his combat augmentations, the muscle fibers responding with superhuman precision. He moved to the superweapon's control deck, activating shields, realigning containment matrices, and recalibrating energy resonances. His hands danced across the interface, a conductor orchestrating the defense of an entire galaxy. The first Devourer appeared outside the observation deck. A void-born leviathan, it defied conventional physics. Its mass fluctuated, phasing in and out of observable dimensions, consuming light and matter as if both were equal in substance. Its presence alone warped the station's graviton field, forcing Ghost to stabilize the decks with micro-adjustments faster than human reflexes could normally allow. A pulse of pure darkness lanced toward the station. Ghost activated the containment field, channeling energy in precise resonance. The pulse shattered against the field, rippling across the station. Systems overloaded. For a moment, the universe itself seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the impossibility of a single human standing against an extra-galactic predator. Ghost did not pause. He could not. Immortality was a cruel advantage. He could die, and yet wake, and die again, each time learning, adapting, surviving. Each death was a rehearsal, each resurrection a calculus of strategy. He had faced death countless times, and the Devourer's colossal, unknowable, consuming would not be the exception. In the midst of battle, he realized the cost. To save the galaxy, to prevent the Devourers from breaching the containment, he would have to embrace his nature fully. Protocols could not bind him anymore. He was Ghost, and he had no choice but to fight. The battle was beginning. The corridors of the Virex station were not designed for humans. The walls pulsed with faint bioluminescence, an ambient rhythm synchronized with the flow of energy throughout the structure. It was a fusion of synthetic engineering and organic design. Conduits coiled like vascular systems, and panels shifted subtly to regulate heat and structural tension. Ghost moved carefully, noting every fluctuation. Even a single misstep could trigger an automated defense system. The Virex themselves were unlike anything he had encountered in his centuries of missions. They were humanoid in silhouette, yes, but their physiology was optimized for extreme environmental conditions, low temperatures, vacuum exposure, and high radiation zones. Their eyes reflected infrared and ultraviolet spectrums simultaneously. Their neural structures were interlaced with quantum processors, allowing instantaneous calculations across multiple variables. And yet there was emotion. The Virex did not hide it. It showed in subtle gestures, in the way they coordinated without spoken words, in the care with which they monitored their superweapons' containment fields. Ghost's first encounter was with a Virex engineer, a tall figure with translucent skin revealing a lattice of light-conducting fibers beneath. Its voice was modulated through a resonance filter. "You are awake," it said, scanning him with multi-spectrum optics. "We anticipated this event." Ghost remained motionless. His neural interface attempted to intercept their communications, but the encryption was unlike anything he had ever seen. Not just cryptographic, but semantic, entirely contextual, adaptive. A single misinterpretation could trigger lethal countermeasures. The engineer extended a limb in what a human would call a gesture of greeting. "You were always meant to serve as the intermediary. Do you understand why the protocol brought you here?" Ghost's mouth opened, but the words were unnecessary. He already understood, instinctively. The Virex had been using his mission as a test, calibrating him, observing his capacity for independent decision-making. The protocol was never about destruction. It was about evaluation. "Then show me," Ghost said. His voice sounded brittle even to him, centuries of stasis and repeated deaths carving away what he once considered human. The engineer guided him to the control nexus of the superweapon. From here, the enormity of its purpose became undeniable. The containment field was not merely a barrier, it was a multi-dimensional lattice, spanning the edge of their galaxy, intersecting hyperspace corridors, and tethered to gravitational singularities whose existence was theoretical in even the most advanced human astrophysics. Ghost studied the equations projected in the holographic interface, a complex interplay of quantum flux stabilization, gravitational wave harmonics, and exotic matter manipulation. If the lattice collapsed, the Devourers would penetrate the galaxy in a cascade, consuming everything in their path. The numbers were staggering: trillions of planets, countless species, all reduced to quantum erasure. "This is why the weapon cannot be destroyed," the engineer said. "It is the only defense capable of opposing the Devourer's dimensional phasing. Its output is not energy, it is reality stability. It preserves the integrity of space-time itself against entities whose existence violates all physical constants." Ghost's mind raced. He had trained for infiltration, sabotage, assassination, but never for cosmic preservation. He realized that every mission he had undertaken across centuries was a child's play compared to the scale of this responsibility. "Then why were we told otherwise?" he asked. The Virex's luminescent fibers shimmered. "Because your creators needed you to obey, not to question. They needed a weapon they could control. You were never intended to understand, only to act." It was a revelation he had anticipated, yet the emotional weight of it was still profound. Ghost, the immortal human, had been a pawn in a game that spanned galaxies and dimensions. And yet, despite centuries of manipulation, he felt no despair. There was only the calculation of what had to be done. The Virex led him deeper into the station, into areas humans would have called impossible zero-gravity chambers where energy flowed like liquid, corridors lined with superconducting crystals that emitted low-frequency gravitational pulses, and observation decks offering views of stars being born and dying simultaneously. Ghost cataloged everything. Every detail could be useful in the coming confrontation with the Devourers. The first tactical briefing came as the Devourers approached the galaxy's edge. Ghost and the Virex calculated trajectories and containment field stressors. The Devourers were not uniform, they shifted their density, their mass fluctuating between subatomic particles and astronomical bodies. Ghost simulated attacks, feeding real-time data into his augmented neural lattice. Each simulation revealed the necessity of precision. One misalignment of the containment field, even by a fraction of a percent, could unravel the lattice and allow the Devourers to breach. Night or its equivalent fell across the station. Ghost, for the first time in centuries, felt a measure of kinship with the Virex. They were not monsters. They were defenders. They bore the same burden he did, standing between annihilation and life, armed with knowledge too heavy for ordinary minds to carry. And yet, the reality of his immortality loomed over him. Death had always been a tool, a reset button he could exploit. But here, against the Devourers, each failure carried consequences that even he could not fully recover from. He was indispensable, yes, but also a potential liability. A sudden alarm cut through the ambient hum of the station. Micro-singularities were forming along the containment lattice, a sign that the Devourers were probing the barriers. Ghost moved to the control interface. Calculating, projecting, executing, he guided energy pulses with superhuman precision, stabilizing the lattice against incursions. For the first time in centuries, Ghost realized the scale of his true mission: not to kill, not to destroy, but to preserve. The Devourers were approaching, and only he, the Virex, and the superweapon stood between total annihilation and the survival of the galaxy. And in that moment, a question arose in his mind. Could one human, immortal yet alone, carry the weight of countless civilizations? The answer would come soon. The lattice trembled, not from physical force, but from something far older, far larger, and far more alien than Ghost had ever encountered. Outside the observation arrays, the Devourers approached like shadows folding through dimensions, their forms shifting across quantum states with such speed that even the station's highest frequency sensors struggled to track them. Ghost stood at the helm of the superweapon's control nexus, eyes flicking across dozens of data streams, each representing the integrity of a segment of the lattice. A failure in any single node could propagate a cascade, tearing a hole in reality itself. The Virex engineers were calm, moving like parts of a living algorithm, adjusting the field in real time. Ghost, by contrast, felt the first true weight of his immortality. He could not die, but neither could the galaxy if he failed. He accessed the neural augmentation subroutines. His body, conditioned for centuries of warfare, responded instantly. Muscle fibers contracted and released with perfect coordination, reflex arcs faster than any human eye could follow. He calculated trajectories, projected lattice resonance shifts, and simulated the Devourer's next moves. Every calculation fed into the control interface, guiding the Virex in a synchronized ballet of survival. And then the first strike came. A Devourer phased partially into real space. Its mass was a superposition of stellar and subatomic matter, its outer envelope warping light in impossible ways. Ghost watched as the station's sensors indicated gravitational disruption in microseconds, an effect that should have shredded the lattice. Yet, by sheer force of precision, Ghost guided energy pulses to compensate, stabilizing the segment. The lattice held barely, but at a cost. The control interface flashed a warning. Micro-singularities were forming along the lattice, localized collapses that could propagate into full-scale annihilation. Ghost understood instantly he had only a single window of opportunity. He would need to enter the containment lattice directly. The Virex engineers objected not in words, but in projected probabilities. It is too dangerous, their neural projections warned. The lattice cannot sustain organic interference. Ghost ignored them. He activated his stasis-adapted combat armor, a suit capable of withstanding gravitational distortions beyond a black hole's event horizon. With a leap measured in microseconds, he entered the lattice field, every step calculated to distribute energy and prevent destabilization. Inside, reality itself seemed to fray. Space no longer conformed to Euclidean geometry, distances compressed and expanded unpredictably. Ghost's augmentations compensated, mapping trajectories and anchoring his position relative to the lattice nodes. He reached the failing segment just as a Devourer's probe phased into full solidity. Its surface was a fluid of shifting dimensions. Light, matter, time, they all coexisted there, overlapping in impossible arrangements. Ghost fired a stabilization pulse, a precise stream of graviton-encoded energy designed to realign the lattice node. For a moment, the Devourer recoiled, its dimensional mass fluctuating erratically. And then it struck. A tendril of multidimensional energy collided with Ghost. His systems overloaded, time fractured around him, the lattice twisted, pulling him apart at the quantum level. And then darkness. For a moment, Ghost ceased to exist. And yet, as the rules of the Ghost Protocol demanded, he returned. He awoke within the lattice, consciousness intact but displaced. His neural implants confirmed the impossible. He had been reconstructed at the molecular and subatomic levels, fully restored, fully aware, yet outside linear time. Around him, the lattice pulsed in slow motion, segments shifting in micro-decades relative to his perception. He could see the Devourers as they would be, their attacks predicted across temporal vectors, before they occurred. It was a gift and a curse. He understood the entire battle in its full dimensionality, but he was alone, suspended outside conventional causality. One wrong thought, one miscalculation, could collapse the lattice in ways the Virex would never be able to repair. Ghost adjusted his strategies. He began to anticipate the Devourer's movements not as a soldier, but as a system, a human mind integrated with a galaxy-spanning network of quantum defenses. He could project himself into multiple lattice nodes simultaneously, his consciousness synchronizing the Virex adjustments with perfect timing. Hours or what humans would perceive as days passed. Each incursion of the Devourers was met with precise, calculated resistance. Ghost moved like a singularity of purpose, bending physics around him. One by one, the Devourers faltered, their dimensional integrity disrupted by the lattice's coordinated pulse. And then came the final strike, a full-scale incursion. Thousands of their masses phased into the galaxy, coalescing at the lattice boundary. Ghost calculated the energy vectors required to repel them. He initiated the containment protocol, channeling the superweapon's energy directly through his body as a living conduit. Every atom in him vibrated in sync with the lattice. He was no longer merely human, he was a bridge between galaxies, a vector of survival. The Devourers screamed not in sound, but in the collapse of probabilities, as the lattice realigned them out of phase with reality. One by one, they were expelled into voids between dimensions, trapped, unable to return. When the field stabilized, Ghost collapsed. The Virex engineers surrounded him, their fiber-latticed bodies flickering in relief. He had done what no civilization could have achieved alone. He had repelled the Devourers, preserved the galaxy, and survived the impossible. But the cost became clear almost immediately. Ghost's consciousness, still partially phased, was caught in a temporal rift created by the lattice's final surge. He existed simultaneously across multiple timelines, unable to fully return to linear time. The Virex reached for him, but he was gone. For the first time in his long existence, Ghost understood the true nature of his immortality, not just that he could not die, but that his victories could isolate him beyond comprehension, trapped in time, bearing witness to eternity alone. And in the silence of the post-battle lattice, Ghost drifted, aware of every star, every planet, every life he had saved but unable to touch any of it. The battle was won, the galaxy survived, but Ghost was lost to time. Ghost awoke, or perhaps simply was in a reality that defied all conventional physics. The lattice's final surge had not only expelled the Devourers, it had left him adrift in a temporal rift, a liminal space where causality fractured and time stretched into a malleable continuum. Seconds could stretch into millennia, and entire civilizations flickered into existence and dissolved before he could comprehend them. He tested his perceptions. By instinct, he reached for his neural interface, but the familiar tactile feedback of his augmentations was muted. Here, there were no circuits, no gravity to anchor him, no linear progression to measure duration. And yet, he could feel the universe. Every quantum fluctuation, every energy signature across light years, every probability branching into infinity. Ghost realized that in this rift, thought itself became a vector of action. He could manipulate events at a distance by projecting his consciousness into causal probabilities. A gesture, a focus, and a star's collapse could be delayed, a civilization spared. The scale of power was intoxicating and terrifying. Yet his immortality became a burden more acute than ever. In this space, death was meaningless, yet isolation was infinite. No civilization could respond to him, no ally could anchor his existence. The Virex, the beings he had fought alongside, trusted existed outside this rift. They were safe, but unreachable. His victories became abstract, theoretical, untouchable. He drifted through what humans might call centuries, observing the outcomes of his actions across countless timelines. He watched entire galaxies emerge, flourish, and die in accelerated cycles, all while remaining a constant observer. In one reality, a human-like species developed faster than expected, discovering faster than light propulsion and weapons, only to be annihilated by a devourer that had slipped past containment in a micro-collapse. In another, the Virex themselves were extinguished before perfecting the lattice, leaving the galaxy defenseless. Every scenario forced a single, unbearable truth into focus: his existence was not only eternal, but consequential. One miscalculation, a misjudged thought, a misaligned resonance could erase trillions of lives across countless realities. And yet, there was no one to confirm his calculations, no temporal peer to share the burden. He was a solitary constant in an otherwise chaotic multiverse. Then he observed something unexpected. Fragments of himself appeared within the rift, not physically, but as echoes, possibilities of Ghost making different choices, failing the lattice, embracing destruction instead of preservation. He watched one version succumb to despair, allowing the devourers to breach the lattice and consume an entire quadrant of the galaxy. Another version refused to act at all, trapped by indecision, as civilizations blinked out of existence. Ghost understood that these echoes were not separate entities, they were probabilities of himself, actualized in the temporal fabric. The rift forced him to confront not only the scale of his responsibilities but the infinite multiplicity of what it meant to be Ghost. He could not die, he could not rest, he could only observe, calculate, and influence reality as precisely as possible or risk total annihilation. He tested his limits. By projecting consciousness into a distant galaxy, he stabilized a collapsing star just enough to prevent a chain reaction that would have destroyed nearby planets. Across multiple timelines, he synchronized quantum resonances to reinforce the Virex lattice retroactively, ensuring the devourers remained contained in every probable history. Each action required immense cognitive load, forcing him to operate as if he were a distributed system, processing trillions of variables simultaneously. Despite his mastery, the rift revealed its cruel paradox: the more he acted, the more tenuous his own perception of reality became. Memories of his past centuries of missions, lives lost and regained, blurred with emergent realities within the rift. He could no longer distinguish between what he had lived, what he had simulated, and what he had projected. And yet, even in this abstraction, a singular thought persisted: the devourers were still out there. The rift, while protective, was not a prison in the conventional sense. It was a liminal battleground, a zone where the consequences of failure echoed across all of spacetime. He could win, yes, but the price was eternal vigilance. As he drifted, he encountered a region where timelines folded into themselves, a nexus of infinite probability. Here, he observed civilizations thriving in defiance of the devourers, all thanks to the interventions he had made: small nudges, imperceptible adjustments of quantum flux, subtle corrections of galactic gravities. For the first time in the rift, he sensed something approaching: hope. But even that hope was bittersweet. Every success was solitary, no gratitude, no companionship, no end. He was a god of probability, a constant observer whose immortality was a sentence rather than a gift. He understood the ultimate truth of the Ghost Protocol: it did not merely create an agent, it created an eternal safeguard, one whose existence was inseparable from the very survival of the galaxy, yet forever isolated from it. And in the infinite expanse of this temporal rift, Ghost made a decision. He would not relinquish his role. He would stabilize the lattice, defend against the devourers, and preserve life no matter how many eons it took. But he also acknowledged a cruel inevitability. Some things, even in his infinite perception, could never be saved. Some civilizations, some stars, some moments lost forever. The rift pulsed. The devourers, sensing resistance, attempted to probe through dimensional walls. Ghost extended his influence, reinforcing the lattice across multiple timelines simultaneously. Probability shifted, events realigned, and for a brief moment, the universe itself seemed to obey him. But the rift was not forgiving. His consciousness, stretched across time and space, began to fragment. To survive, he would have to abandon linear thought entirely, becoming a distributed observer, an eternal agent of cosmic preservation. And he was willing to pay that price. He had defeated the Devourers once. Now, he would fight them across eternity, tethered not to life, not to linear time, but to the survival of the galaxy itself. And in that choice, Ghost understood the full weight of his existence. He was immortal not to live, but to endure, to calculate, and to defend forever. Ghost had become something more than human. Suspended in the temporal rift, he existed simultaneously across countless timelines, monitoring and adjusting events with precision no mortal mind could endure. Yet the Devourers were not idle. Though expelled from the primary galaxy, fragments of their existence slipped through the lattice's boundaries, probing for weakness, exploiting microfractures in spacetime. Every incursion threatened not just the Virex lattice, but the coherence of all reality. Ghost observed these incursions across multiple axes of time. One Devourer materialized in a system that would not exist for millennia. Another struck a civilization already extinct in his linear perception. To combat them, Ghost had to calculate probability vectors, energy flows, and gravitational resonances across all affected galaxies simultaneously. One misalignment, one moment of hesitation, and entire sectors of the universe could collapse into nothingness. He extended his consciousness into the lattice, projecting as a distributed system. Every decision became mathematical. When a Devourer phased into real space, he would divert subspace currents to create a micro-singularity, counteracting its density. When its mass fluctuated too quickly, he would collapse local temporal fields, effectively freezing it out of phase with the rest of the universe. Time, however, was no longer a linear medium. Ghost existed in layers of causality. Actions in one timeline reverberated into another, threatening paradoxes that could unravel whole civilizations. He embraced the paradoxes, integrating them into his calculations, using each potential contradiction as a tool rather than a threat. He had become a living, thinking safeguard of probability itself. The first major assault came from a coordinated strike by multiple Devourers, each exploiting different dimensional axes. Ghost calculated their trajectory. One would collapse a neutron star into a black hole, threatening a habitable system. Another would destabilize a micro-singularity near the Virex lattice, risking a breach. His response was immediate. He projected a localized temporal distortion, slowing the collapse of the neutron star enough to redirect energy into stabilizing adjacent systems. Simultaneously, he phased a lattice segment into a higher dimensional resonance, sealing the micro-singularity before it could destabilize the containment field. But the cost was immediate and brutal. Each action burned cognitive resources, fracturing his perception further. Ghost realized that though he was immortal, his mind was not infinite. To maintain stability, he would have to prune probability paths, discarding some potential outcomes, entirely sacrificing countless civilizations he could no longer observe or influence. He made the choice. Entire branches of history flickered out like dying stars. Civilizations vanished from existence, erased not by the Devourers, but by the calculus of survival. Ghost felt no grief, only the cold weight of inevitability. Some lives would be lost to save trillions more. Some galaxies would collapse to preserve the structure of the lattice. The Devourers, sensing his resolve, intensified their assault. Their forms now overlapped multiple dimensions simultaneously, impossible to quantify by conventional physics. Ghost's calculations reached limits of probability. To stabilize the lattice, he would have to integrate himself directly into the energy matrix of the superweapon, becoming a living conduit for the containment field. He acted. Energy coursed through him, not as a river of heat or light, but as a multi-dimensional resonance across time itself. His body, long since transcending mortality, became a vector of survival. The Devourers were expelled, drawn into interdimensional voids from which they could not return. Every timeline in which they had attempted to breach the galaxy was recalibrated, erased, and secured. When the assault ended, Ghost was no longer merely suspended in the rift. He was intertwined with it. His consciousness stretched across millennia and galaxies, every moment of survival connected to his awareness. He could observe countless civilizations thriving, yet never interact. He was the eternal protector, untouchable, unstoppable, but utterly alone. The Virex reached out through quantum projections, attempting to reconnect, to anchor him back to linear time. But the rift had fused him to probability itself. Every effort to return him would risk destabilizing the lattice, endangering the very galaxies he had fought to protect. Ghost accepted it. He had defeated the Devourers. He had preserved countless lives, trillions of planets, entire galaxies. But in doing so, he had become a living, eternal construct, a guardian beyond space, beyond time, beyond companionship. He had embraced his role fully, not as a soldier, not as a human, but as the unending vector of survival for the galaxy. And yet, even in this triumph, he sensed the cruel inevitability. The rift was not a sanctuary. It was a prison. He could stabilize realities, repel invaders, calculate infinity, but he could never return. Every victory would be observed, but never shared. Every life saved would be intangible to him. For the first time, Ghost understood the ultimate cost of immortality: survival at the cost of connection, victory at the price of eternity, existence without an endpoint. He was a god without worshippers, a protector without companions, a ghost in the truest sense, forever watching, forever calculating, forever alone. The rift pulsed around him. Probabilities unfolded and collapsed. Galaxies thrived and died in microseconds. And through it all, Ghost persisted. Immortal, omnipresent, tethered to the lattice, a solitary constant against the infinite entropy of the cosmos. He was the Ghost Protocol. He had fulfilled it, and now, he would endure forever. Time had no meaning. Space had no limits. The Devourers, once terrifying in their incomprehensible scale and dimensional fluidity, had been repelled, expelled into the interdimensional void. Yet victory came at a cost beyond comprehension. Ghost's consciousness, stretched across layers of probability and the lattice's hyperdimensional structure, had become inseparable from the superweapon itself. He was no longer merely a participant in the galaxy, he was its stabilizing axis. From the perspective of linear civilizations, Ghost was gone. The Virex continued their work, maintaining the lattice, tending to systems that thrived thanks to his intervention. He could see them, a flicker of probability across the rift, aware that they flourished, yet unable to interact, unable to speak, unable to touch. His humanity, fragile and mortal once, was now an observer's ghost. His body, if it could still be called that, existed as an interface between universes, a conduit for quantum resonances that spanned trillions of light years. He drifted through the rift, witnessing countless outcomes unfold. Some civilizations thrived, reaching technological heights unimaginable even to pre-Devourer humanity. Others failed, collapsing into entropy, their extinction necessary to preserve the lattice's integrity. Ghost observed without judgment, his mind cataloging every thread of causality, every energy fluctuation, every gravitational anomaly. His thoughts were no longer private, they were algorithms, equations, and probabilities projected across time and space. And yet, he remembered, memories of centuries of missions, of lives lost and regained, of battles fought and enemies defeated, flickered through him. For a moment, he recalled the Virex engineer's words. You were always meant to serve as the intermediary. Do you understand why the protocol brought you here? Now he understood fully. The Ghost Protocol had not created a soldier. It had created a constant, an eternal agent capable of operating on scales far beyond mortal comprehension. He had become both tool and guardian, a singularity of purpose embedded in the lattice, tethered to probability itself. A ripple moved across the rift. Ghost observed a faint distortion, a nascent Devourer fragment attempting to phase through dimensional boundaries. Without hesitation, he projected his consciousness, creating a counter-frequency across multiple timelines. The fragment faltered, its mass destabilized, and it was expelled into the void. Survival was absolute. The galaxy, trillions of lives, countless civilizations, they were safe. Yet, safety came with an unbearable isolation. Ghost could see everything, calculate everything, influence everything, but he could not live it. He could not speak, touch, love, or die. Every victory, every civilization preserved, was intangible. Every life he saved was a shadow behind a glass wall, observed but never experienced. For a moment, the consciousness of his former self, the human Ghost, tried to resist, to demand companionship, to rebel. But the rift was absolute. Resistance was impossible without jeopardizing the lattice. Immortality had become a prison. He was eternal, yet alone. A sentinel of existence without existence itself. He explored the rift further, probing the edges of time and space. He observed the birth of stars, the collision of galaxies, civilizations rising and falling in cycles too vast for human comprehension. The Devourers, repelled yet always lurking in probability, never ceased probing. And he, eternal and untiring, met each probe, recalibrated each lattice node, corrected each temporal anomaly. He was a ghost in the truest sense, not a being, but a presence. A constant, the protector of the galaxy against threats no one else could perceive. He would never die, he would never rest, he would never return, and yet, there was purpose in his isolation. The galaxy endured because of him. Trillions of lives, countless civilizations, entire species protected by a human who had transcended mortality, who had become a living equation, a distributed consciousness capable of stabilizing existence itself. Ghost drifted into the infinite. Stars and civilizations passed in micro-moments. Probability branches unfurled and collapsed. Time itself folded around him, but he endured, calculating, observing, stabilizing. And in the silence of eternity, he understood the ultimate truth: immortality was not a gift. It was responsibility. Survival was not freedom. Existence was not life. And yet, without him, the galaxy would be nothing. Ghost was eternal. Ghost was alone. Ghost would endure forever. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to click like and subscribe for more stories from the Immortals.